All right, everybody, and welcome to my video showing you how to assemble your 4x5 5119 cameras pinhole camera. Hi, Steinbeck. So, thank you very much for purchasing one of these. Thank you, Steinbeck. I needed kisses. Thank you very much for purchasing one of these. And let's start off by unpackaging it. If you do this well, you might even be able to keep this sticker. There we go. All right. In addition to this little bundle, that when you order your camera, you're also going to get some Type Bond 3, a couple of brushes, some number of rubber bands that you'll be using to hold the camera together as the glue sets, and a 35mm cassette holder of nuts and bolts. This holds 3 25mm M5 bolts and 3 M5 nuts, and these are going to be used for your shutter assembly. All right. I'm going to be using a reusable brush for this video rather than the disposables, simply because I want to minimize waste. But let's go over everything here and do an inventory. This is your 5119 cameras, the 45 Model 1 side plate with all the data. Side plate felt. This is your other side plate with the bubble level. Side plate felt. This is the front of the camera with the pinhole. Yours will actually arrive looking like this. This is the inside facing part of the camera. If you put this on the outside, not only is it going to look ugly, but your shutter is going to destroy your pinhole. This is the front of the camera with the pinhole recessed. This is the pinhole plate, pinhole board felt. You might notice there's a notch right there. That indicates the top, that this aligns with the top of the board. This is the bottom of the camera right here. This is the top of the camera. These are the felt liners for the top and the bottom. These are these 4 rectangles here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's the 4th one. Are the suede liners that go on this piece right here, which is the film holder board, just like that. And this is your wool gasket. Now, worst case scenario is that your wool gasket has broken in transit. This is a very thin part. If it's broken, that's fine. Just hold these 2 pieces off to the side. They don't actually have to be attached for this camera to work. So I'm going to break both of mine so that you can see how to assemble them if they're broken. Oh, and these are the other parts of the wool gasket assembly. These are your 2 lengths of shock cord that will be used to keep the film holder in place. This is your shutter assembly right here. This is the film holder board and the film exposure calculator. This has paper on it. You can remove the paper at any time. You do want to remove the paper before you assemble this camera because it will be kind of hard to get to it after you've assembled the camera. And if you leave it on in time with use, it will start to peel back as film holders bump up against it. So it's just a good idea to take it off. Okay. One thing you'll notice about mine versus yours is that yours is going to arrive unfinished, looking like this. I've applied a satin or semi-gloss, I forget which, clear polyurethane to these, 3 layers of it, and so that's why it's a little bit darker and shinier. Now, one thing I need to draw your attention to here, which is different than the other cameras, is that this notch is a different length than the others. This piece has to be put together the correct way, okay? So you'll notice here that that is not an accident. This part is shorter because this is where the tripod socket's going to go on the side, and I ran into issues with some of my prototypes where this would protrude out the side like this did, and I couldn't lock the tripod because of this protrusion. That makes it kind of hard to use a tripod in landscape orientation with this. So this is the inside of the camera. We're going to do everything orienting it to the inside of the camera. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is lay down your exposure calculator. We're going to put this piece together first because it is critical that we get it done correctly, and it's a little bit tricky. If you get it done incorrectly, that's going to be a problem. Okay, so this side right here has to align with that side right there. This is the inside facing part of the calculator. So this must be the inside facing part of the film holder board. The way that this is going to go together is that these 4 pieces of suede are going to fit just like this. So we're going to do this first. That way we get it out of the way and we know that we've put this thing together correctly. Okay? So let's grab some glue. Now, try to be judicious about your glue use, meaning don't use all that much of it, because if you put too much on, you can cause the wood, or bamboo actually, to warp, and we don't want that. What you do want is just to put a little bead on here and make sure that you glue it out to the corners and the edges. This doesn't have to be pretty. No one's ever going to see this part once the camera's assembled. Next, we're going to grab the felt, and we're just going to put the paper side up. I'm just going to put the felt right onto the camera body. Now, the felt here, the suede, technically it's suede, what this does is this creates a nice interior matte black space. The only job of this suede is to eliminate light reflections off of this bamboo piece. So by having the suede here, we do that. And it doesn't have to be pretty because no one's ever going to see it, and the light doesn't care whether or not it's being absorbed by pretty or ugly suede. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to flip this over and we're going to give it a good press, just like that. Okay, now there were supposed to be some markings up here to help you align these pieces, but for whatever reason, I'm sure it was my mistake, they aren't there. So we know, because of this, the way that this aligns, that this is the top of this board. So let's get the wool that we're going to put on here for the wool gasket laid out so we can see how it's going to go. These pieces, by the way, are the same. You can flip them over however you want, and they just go right there. Now, the little opening up here goes near the top because when we take our 4x5 film holder and it gets loaded from the top of the camera, this opening here aligns with the light proofing bevel so that this forms your light proof seal along the top of the camera. So I'm going to set these pieces out over here, and once again, we're going to glue. Now, you can, if you really want to, avoid gluing in that opening where that seal is, but it doesn't affect anything if you glue right over it. So I'm going to do that because that'll make my life a little bit easier here, since the little triangular bits broke off of my wool during transport, right? I mean, I did just kind of tear them off with my fingers. You were watching that, but I'm simulating the worst case scenario for you guys. So we'll take this big fat piece that goes along the top and we'll just set it there, press it down. We want to get these corners lined up, so we're just going to press it on in. We're going to take these little wool triangles, we're just going to fit them in place right there and there. Okay, there we go. Next, we're going to do the same along the bottom. We're going to set this piece down here on the bottom. Press the corners up into the corners. Then we're going to grab the side. Going to assemble the side just like that. You don't want to press this too far. And you want to kind of leave that little piece in there as a guide for where to put it. But this will work out nicely. And this one doesn't have a guide, so we're just going to kind of eyeball it, because this piece was more damaged during transit. Okay, there we go. That's how this is going to look now that it's assembled. You can see how the 4x5 film holder is going to sit in there, and that ridge on the other side just is nesting right up against that wool, right? That's how it's going to fit. So we're going to flip this over, going to give it a really good press, and we're going to set this off to the side to allow the glue to dry. Next thing we're going to do are the top and bottom. So these are done in basically the same way, okay? So what we're going to do first is we're going to see how this felt is going to rest. We want to align the long end here with the front of those two holes. And then just for this piece, we're just going to kind of eyeball the centering, because there's no real marker built into this that's easy to use to figure out how to align it. If we flip it over, you can see that these corners here do pretty well align with those corners, but it's kind of hard to feel that out as you're assembling it. So there's enough forgiveness built into these pieces that if it's not perfectly centered, that's going to be okay. For the top part right here, if we align this along those holes, just like we do, now these wings here are the same length as this space here. And then again, you just kind of eyeball the centering of it, because there's no real great guide in this design for how well it's centered. But you know what? As long as you're within about 8-9 millimeters, which is a heck of a margin of error, you're going to be just fine. So if it looks centered to you, it's going to be good. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of glue. And you don't need a ton here. I actually put, again, a little bit more than I would have liked. But what we're going to do is just going to put it here in the center. Do not like slather this all over the board, because one, you will really risk warping the board. And two, it's going to make it a lot harder to put this felt into place when it comes time to do the final assembly. Just going to mash that around like that. We're just going to drop this felt into place like that. We're going to flip this over, give it a good press. Looks pretty good. We're going to set this off to the side and let the glue set, and we're going to come back and take the paper off and do the taping in the same order we're putting the felt on when we're done with the other pieces. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to glue up and assemble the shutter on the front of the camera. So we know that, because I told you this a minute ago, that notch goes in the top. Let's see what happens when I assemble this backwards. Oh dear. So if you cannot really assemble the camera if you put the felt on backwards. You can see that the holes are covered, and that's not really placed well. The top has these little wing-like overhangs up here, and the bottom has those feet. So if this is assembled correctly, that's how it's going to look. And you know you assemble it correctly because you lift this up and you look through the holes at a light source, and you can see that the holes are lined up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the glue, and this is one of those things where you again want to be a little bit judicious. We just really need glue a little bit at the corners and in the center, because this is going to get plenty more glue at the end of the build. So the purpose of this glue is really just to make sure that this suede rather, doesn't go anywhere until we're done with it, well, at all. If the glue holds it in place for the build, the rest of the glue we use will hold it in place after the build. So let's get this nice and lined up. I'm going to flip this over, give it a really good press. There we go. And we'll come back and take the paper off in a little bit. Next two pieces are the sides. And again, like the top and bottom, these are done in the same way. What we're going to do with the sides is we're going to grab the piece of felt and we're going to line it up with those two holes. And now we're going to try to center it. And the way we center it is, you can see that little line right there. That lines up with that protrusion on the front of the felt. So if we line that up and we have this long length lined up with those two holes, we know we've centered the felt. And that's the same for both pieces. Next, I'm going to grab some glue. And as with the top and bottom, you want to use this sparingly, because too much, which is what I just used, can risk causing this board to warp. All right. One piece of felt, flip it over, give it a good press. Set that aside to dry for a few minutes. There's tinfoil underneath this piece of suede here, and so you can be a little bit aggressive with the glue on the suede. There we go. Give that a really nice press, because honestly this piece is going to have trouble sticking in place until after the camera is assembled. I have been running into issues with some of the felt from this lot. Now let's come back to the front of the camera and assemble. Now that this glue is set up for a few minutes, we're going to assemble the shutter. So we need our 3 shutter components and our nuts and bolts. The way that this is going to go together is that the lollipop, which is this part, fits right here. The half moon fits right here. Okay? So that's what it's going to look like underneath the shutter cover. This shutter cover is placed correctly if the smooth side of the ring is matched up with the smooth side of the wood. There's a ridge between the ring and the wood here, or a cutout or a valley, whatever you want to call it. It's definitely not a ridge. So if that gap is that way, I mean, you could put it on this way, but it won't look as good, and also filters won't thread onto it quite as easily. This was the side that I tried to get the glue blobs to poke out of. Didn't succeed perfectly with all of them, but if you stain your camera or polyurethane it, you will not notice the glue blobs, because there were some glue blobs around this ring that are completely hidden by the stain. So we're going to take the 3 bolts, we're going to slide them through these holes, then we're going to line them up with the parts on the camera. There we go. Going to grab those bolts with our fingers and flip over the front plate. We're just going to finger tighten these nuts for right now. Now you'll notice there is an extra hole in this felt. That's A-OK. It does not affect the image quality at all. Its sole purpose is to give you flexibility in how you assemble this, whether you take the paper off prior to or after placing the felt on the bamboo. Now we're going to flip it over, hold the nuts, and finger tighten the bolts. And why you're doing this way is because if you hold the nuts, they'll compress into the suede on the back, and they'll function like lock nuts and washers in one. That's what the suede does for the nuts, so that in the future you can just adjust the resistance on the shutter by adjusting the bolts. Now you can see this is way too stiff. That's better, but it's rubbing up against the metal of the shutter, so we're going to loosen this just a hair. Getting there. And pretty close. The shutters will wear in with time, and you'll want to be able to tighten these and loosen them as the shutters break in. What I like for this is to be able to operate the shutter smoothly without feeling like it's jerking the camera around, but if that happens, the shutter doesn't move. I don't want this to be so loose that it opens by itself, right? So for me, this is pretty darn close to perfect. We're going to start assembling the camera, and we're going to start by taking the paper off of the suede, and we're going to tape up the interior pieces of suede on the main body parts as well. So we're going to take the tape off of this suede on the film holder plate, and having more issues with this suede, this is one of those things that when the glue finishes setting, it's like it's so good, but for some reason, some of the pieces of suede that I got in the batch that these cameras came from don't like being glued, and I'm not sure why, but it is immensely frustrating. So I'm going to show you a trick on how to fix that if that happens to your cameras. Okay, what we're going to do next is we're going to peel the paper backing off of this. Now, here's where having some masking tape will really make your life a whole lot easier. Because what you want to do to help with assembly is we're going to fold over the end of the felt and the other end of the felt. Suede, I keep calling it felt. Now, if your suede is not sticking to the wood very well, we're going to take another piece and we're going to not give it a choice. There we go. You don't want to have this tape overlap this area. You want to give yourself some clear space because this is where the body is going to glue together. Next, we're going to fold up the bottom here, and this is ready to be assembled. All right, now we're going to do the same with the suede on the sides of the camera. All right, so we've got the suede taken care of on all of the interiors of our pieces. So next, let's start assembly. First thing we need to do is grab the back here. What we're going to do is figure out which side each of these goes on. I can never remember. Okay, so this is the top. All right, so what we can do to fit this up is we're going to grab these two parts, and they only go together one way. Like you cannot get them together the wrong way. So if these parts fit up and we know that this is the top, that means this part goes there, this part goes here, and then that must be the bottom. So now we're pretty well along the way to getting this assembled. And we have our front plate here, which we'll come back to in a minute. So let's start with the gluing. Remember, this part here that's solid goes to the inside. And this part here that has the gasket goes to the outside. So you know that you have this assembled correctly if when you hold the camera piece like this, you can see that gap in the wool gasket. Now we're just going to repeat this on the bottom. There we go. Now we're going to set this on the side, like this, and haha, I was right the first time. All right. We're going to repeat this for the sides. For the side pieces, we're going to glue up along the top and bottom like this, and along those holes. If it's not pretty, that's okay, because no one's going to see it. There we go. Wipe up any excess, because that people will see, and that would be unacceptable. Okay. Flip this over to the other side. Now we're just going to take the side piece here, slide those pegs through the holes, get this nice and fitted up. Fix the other side when it accidentally pops out. Wipe up any glops that squeeze out. Next thing we're going to do is glue the front of the camera on. As you can see, it just is going to fit right like that. The easiest way with this part of the project to glue it up is to just glue the inside here. If you are good enough with a glue brush to glue in between each of these little joints, that's okay. It's not gonna hurt, can only help. I am not good enough with a glue brush to do that, at least not and have it have any sort of quality end result. And it's okay to get glue on the felt here, because in a few minutes we're going to get even more glue on the felt. I do have a little bit left over. I'm going to give it a shot to do the corners here, because those are kind of critical. And one other thing you can do is what I'm going to do. Apply some glue inside the camera body where these joints are. This will also help a lot with the finished result. And we'll clean up all of those messes in just a minute. Fit the joint together. There we go. And because this is polyurethane with an oil-based polyurethane, I'll be able to come through with a paper towel and some water after this glue dries and clean up all of those little splotches, if they're even visible, which they might not be. Okay, now we've got to do the interior felt in this camera. So let's see if I can show you what we're dealing with here. So along this edge right here, there's exposed wood. What we're going to do is we're going to take glue and we're going to put it along all of these interior edges, because that's going to help hold the felt down, but it's also going to help with light proofing and increase a little bit the structural stability of the camera. So, almost out of glue in my other jars, so I'm just going to grab this one here. And it is okay at this point to be heavy-handed with the glue. We're just going to take the glue on the brush and we're just going to jam it right along the bottoms. I do tend to like to do the top and bottom first. I find them to be a little bit harder to do, and I want to get the hard work out of the way so that I can call this the part, oh darn it, the part I don't like done. Now we're going to take the tape off of the suede that's on the bottom. There we go. Get that panel pressed back into position. Get that felt pressed into the corners there, just like that. Next, we're going to do this side. Actually, I guess technically what we're doing is the top of the camera, but you get my point. Okay, now we're going to take the tape off of this felt, and we're going to push the pieces of the felt, those overhangs that we taped up, we're going to push those right into the corners. All right, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the exact same process, but along the seams that the sides connect to. And that means we're also going to be re-gluing over a couple of the places where we already glued, and that's okay. We can just go ahead and slather it on in there. What you want to do is you make sure that you get it on both the wood and the suede. There we go. We're going to take the tape off of the suede. And then we just simply fold the suede up into the corners like that. And if you have some bubbles in the suede like this, it's okay. That doesn't have any effect on image quality. And now we're going to repeat on the other side. When you're doing this, make sure, as to the best of your ability, to get the glue on both the wood and the other layer of suede, because that's going to give you the best bond you can get as you glue the suede to itself and the camera. Going to tuck this suede down into the corners, just like that. And now you have gotten yourself a very, very light, tight finished product, because the suede is overlapping the seams with multiple layers of suede, and it's going to do very well at keeping this camera light sealed. Now, the next thing is you're going to have some number of number 64 rubber bands. Just going to take 3 of these, put them right along there. That's going to hold those for now. We'll come back to the front in just a moment. Now you know you've put this together correctly if the flush end is right there and the tripod socket is right there, okay? Next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab a 4x5 film holder. We're going to pop it into the back of the camera, and this is basically just going to help us make sure that everything is aligned and fitted up properly. Next, we're going to grab our exposure calculator. What we're going to do is we're going to grab the short length of shock cord, and we're going to feed it up through these two holes. There is way, way, way more of this than you need, by the way. And then you're going to pull it tight and tie a nice knot right there. This you want to have be a hair tight because it's got to do the job of both sides down here. Next, we're going to grab our long length of shock cord. We're going to feed it up through the holes like we did with the short one. There we go. And now down through the other side. There we go. All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to pull this tight. And again, this is way longer than you need it to be, and that's intentional. Now we're going to, now that we have that tight, ooh, this is fixed, by the way, on the final ones, that misaligned thing there. That is not wrong on yours, just so you know. Okay. So we want to have this be tight enough that it will put pressure on the film holder, but that we can still lift it away from the camera. So this is pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is just make a knot. There we go. Yeah, that feels pretty decent. And then I'm going to go back, cut the ends of these off, and seal them either with wax glue or by melting the ends with a match. And that's going to be set. Last thing we've got to do is help ensure that this whole thing glues up nice and tight. And there we go. And believe it or not, those rubber bands will do a good enough job of holding everything together that it's going to look pretty decent and be light proof. So there we go. Assembling the 5119 cameras 4x5. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.